the end credits there, this film debuted in 2015. We premiered it in New Orleans on the anniversary of the fire. We had friends, families of the victims come in from across the country for the world premiere. I thought that was the only place where we should have a world premiere. And that was in the summer of 2015. So now that we're in 2017, we live in a somewhat different world. And because on June 12th, 2016, the Pulse shooting happened. And the death toll at Pulse surpassed the death toll of the upstairs lounge. So it's very haunting and prophetic. Those last two interviews that are in the film, ever since the Pulse shooting, they give me chills because it's a bit of foreshadowing. Because what Ricky Everett says, look what anger and hate can do. And we saw that again happen in Orlando. And Reverend Perry saying, I hope our community never has to go through this. I hope not. I pray not. And then we see another community have to go through this horror, this senseless horror of death and tragedy. So it is, the upstairs lounge fire is no longer the largest gay mass murder in U.S. history, and unfortunately we have yet another one. But we must unite and make sure we do what we can to honor the memories of those lost in both tragedies and continue to teach our history and keep their memories alive moving forward. So I'm going to open it up for some questions. Okay, let me see, is there any opening comments up here?
This is the first time I've seen the film. So obviously it was a very emotional experience for me and a reminder. People's faces, people's names that I knew. To give you a little bit of a background of my association with the New Orleans church, was I was pastoring in Atlanta and Southeast District Coordinator for Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. And the church in New Orleans was kind of at the far-flung geographical location of our district. And I had gone there about a year and a half before the tragedy. And they were so glad that somebody was coming to spend some time with them. And I remember one of the memories I had was they took cardboard and they covered it with white satin and they made a mitre out of it. And they crowned me Bishop of New Orleans for MCC. And I remember that because it was just an indication of how quickly we bonded with one another. And then, as the film mentioned, if you remember, I found out about the fire. Ronnie Rosenthal, who was a member of my church in Atlanta, MCC Atlanta, had been there to visit. I think his name was Everett. Ricky Everett. And he called me that night. There was a movie we had at the church that Sunday night. And Ronnie called, and that's when I called Reverend Perry, and we got there the next day. But it seemed so long ago until tonight, and then it seems in seeing the movie tonight like it was yesterday. And we had so much to do, as I talked with Robert last night about it, that I'm not sure we were even aware of what was going on. And as terrible in retrospect as it was, as to some of the reaction and response of officials in the church at that time, you know, I have to tell you, we weren't surprised. Many of you might think how terrible that was, But when you live in that culture and you were used to that every single day, we just had to deal with it and move on. But tonight, it really came flooding in on me how terrible it was of the reactions of the people. But I'm just going to need a little time to process the movie, but it really took me back and brought up a lot of memories.
Thank you, John, for being here. And thank you for all that you did in New Orleans for the community. I didn't say this last night, and I left and oh my gosh. I don't know what the community would have done without you guys there. And I shudder to think what kind of spiritual guidance, if any kind of spiritual guidance they would have had you guys not been there. So thank you so much for going there and helping that community heal. Yes.
Can I say a comment?
Oh, sure.
I apologize, kind of cold here, but I think that sometimes we take it for granted the communication piece with each other, the understanding, the reasoning. But sometimes when we find something that comforts us and make us whole, we go to any length to have that freedom to be free. And but there's a energy, a negative energy that don't want us to be free. Don't want us to be free, no matter who we are. It doesn't matter, what kind of gender we have. Love unites us all, everywhere you go, that's how it is. And when you cross the line where he's not comfortable, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter, you know what I mean? He will destroy it because he doesn't want love around, And when I mentioned the reasoning is sometimes we block, we do that naturally, like, but we're talking about we're humans, we're brothers and sisters here, And they recognize that love is the most powerful thing there is, for all of us. And no matter who we are or what kind of, I go to an AA, and a lot of people go there, but what bonds us together is the unity that we have to help each other to stay clean, not to die overdose or whatever. And when I hug people, we generally hugging, I feel energy from each other, I mean, they do the hookups and everything in the same room, but the unity that we have together, the bond is beautiful. It makes you whole, and I'm not, I have a girlfriend anyway. What I'm saying is that, but we share that bond together. You know what I mean? Because it's beautiful.
I'd like to think that no matter what your background is, how you identify, whether you're male or female or your sexual orientation, your religious background, that we are more alike than we are different. And I like to think that this film kind of shows that we all share that same common thread that we share of love, of family, of faith, of loss, of joy. We are more alike than we are different. So that is one of my hopes, to get that message across with this film. So thank you for sharing. Just kind of moving on to Mr. Skip over here. As you saw, we talked about Ferris football in the epilogue. To give you a little bit of background, Skip contacted me in the beginning of 2015. We were wrapping up this film. It was pretty much locked, and he introduced himself and said, I won't go into the story. He introduced himself to me, and I feel like we've become close family. in the pursuit of more information about his uncle. But I just wanted to explain why there was just the epilogue at the end, because actually, their story is going to be a film of their own. So make sure you like Upstairs Inferno on Facebook to keep in touch with the release of that film. But I'm going to let Skip talk a little bit about how we met, how this all came about in the beginning of January 2015.
Well, as you saw in the epilogue, we didn't find out about what happened to my uncle until January 2015. And some of the questions we've been answering through the last couple of years, through interviews with Robert in the film, a lot of people have asked, well, why didn't you search for him sooner? You know, with the internet and everything else, there's information out there. We have a big family, 13 kids. I've got cousins I'll never know, I'll never meet. And somebody in the family did find out, and they didn't share that information. So we assumed that if anybody in the family would, they would let us know, that we could pursue finding my uncle. Well, we finally did an internet search on our own, and then I found out about Robert and Clayton in this book, and all these other people had already done this research, and they had researched the whole story of the lounge fire. And all of a sudden I find out my uncle was identified, and nobody claimed his body because our family never knew. We're in California, and the fire's in New Orleans, and in Northern California, if you're like LeBlanc, you're family, you're us. We didn't know anybody else had that name very much. When we went to New Orleans, we found out that's kind of like Smith and Jones, everywhere down there. So what we realize now is perhaps, well, the police decided it's a local person. The name is local. And nobody claimed him because they were embarrassed that he was homosexual. And that's been the concept that's been all over the internet and a lot of people's minds, is that was the reason we didn't claim his body. Totally untrue, we didn't know. If we would have known, we would have claimed him in an instant. He was totally loved, totally a member of the family. Every partner that he had during the earlier years and even later years was accepted as a member of our family. It was never an issue in our family. In an interview with my mother, who's 87, they asked about that, and she goes, "We didn't care, we're French. Doesn't matter." It never was an issue. But there's been comments made and such that was the reason why. So that's part of what my journey is with Robert, helping, showing in the film the epilogue and giving interviews and things, is that people know that he was loved and he was not abandoned. And we didn't care that he was homosexual. He was a wonderful human being, and we loved him for that. And we didn't find out because we didn't search, but now we know. The journey is still ongoing. The city, and they're not really helpful. We don't know where he's buried. We know that area, but we don't have a spot. We don't have a plot. We have a number, and the cemetery refuses to cooperate. So we're still trying to find his body. Hopefully, we will find it, and we want to get it reinterred and brought back to California where the family is buried. And he was a World War II vet, and we want to have him buried in the veteran sections of that. So we're still working on that. But finding out what happened to him, for my mother, at least at 87, she feels now she can peacefully go to her grave knowing what happened. As horrible as it was, it does help to know what happened to him. She knows where he was and how he died. And he died 2 days after his 50th birthday, so we think he was probably at the upstairs lounge celebrating his birthday.
Wow. Any questions, Mark?
So they,
Wait, go ahead.
So at any point, like, now that you and your family have found out, are you guys going to have like a plaque for him somewhere near your family and where everybody else is?
Was that again? I'm a
Are you
little hard
guys
of
going to
hearing.
be working on getting a plaque of some sort in Northern California to bring him back home per se?
When we get him back home, yes, we will have. Some of the members of the family that knew about it are a little upset that I'm angry with them for not sharing this. But with a big family, there's a lot of that going on. I will have actually a ceremony. Hopefully the whole family can come and we'll have a place for him there. And I've told the family that. So we want to honor him as a human being that was loved by his family, not that somebody was abandoned and stuck in a hole in the ground. One of the things the city told us when I first contacted them was that, oh, those 4 guys, they were just put in one big old grave, and they weren't even in coffins, they just dumped them in the ground. And that's the city's official comment to me. Knowing that was wrong, I told them that. They didn't like to hear that, because we saw in film, there was 4 grave sites. There was 4 actual places for them to be, so it wasn't what they said. So it's been a real difficult journey, but I'm really proud to be able to do this and try to find them. It's the most important thing.
In New Orleans, when we, the Potter's Field where he is, there, where we believe that he is, there is no marking whatsoever that there are human remains there at all. It looks like a cow pasture. You saw the lockup. You saw the lockup. So they did,
The mayor's office get involved to even allow us to go into that.
so they did mow the field and we were allowed to go in. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to have them put a plaque even on that cyclone fence to just say that this is a cemetery and there are people here, and they will have nothing to do with any of that. We wanted to have a plaque even put in somewhere in that field, and nope, nothing doing. They don't want any attention drawn to that situation at all. It's been very frustrating, very frustrating.
But it's still a journey. As Skip
It is
said,
a journey.
It is,
Not over.
it's still a journey. I think you had a question, some in the front row?
My question was answered.
Oh, okay. Other questions we have? It's okay, we won't bite. Anything else, you guys?
How was it received when it was viewed in New Orleans at the anniversary 2 years ago?
The question is about how was it received at the premiere in New Orleans. I can tell you, I've never been so nervous. I mean, the film is done. I mean, there's nothing I can do at that point. I can't re-edit it. I can't do anything. You know, the film is done. It's ready to be put on the screen. Can't really worry about the projection. I was very nervous about how it was going to be perceived, because we had a sold-out theater full of the people that you saw in the film, family members of the victims, witnesses. This is their story. I just had the privilege of telling it, and I'm just scared on how they would perceive the way that I told the story. You know, those little ideas of self-doubt. Like, did I present it in a way that they will appreciate? And I'm glad to say that we got a standing ovation. There were a lot of tears. And we handed out tissues at the door, just in case. We had a second sold-out screening after that, and then they invited the film back last year for the anniversary of the fire, and they named me Grand Marshal of the Gay Pride Parade. So I was very, very honored for that, and again, it was my privilege to tell the story. Because they trusted me with their memories, and I don't take that lightly. I mean, I'm really thankful they trusted me.
What is the building now that the fire happened? What became of the building itself?
Question is, what's the building now? Well, it is, the ground level is still the Gemini Lounge. That's the name of the bar that it was back in 1973. Still in the same family. It's passed down to the next generation. And the floor that housed the upstairs lounge is now the storage room and office for the Gemini Lounge. Jimmy Masacci, who runs the Gemini Lounge, is a strong advocate of the preservation of the upstairs lounge story. He was, I think, 12 years old, 13 years old at the time of the fire, and he remembers being down there, seeing the flames, and there's a plaque on the ground outside the former entrance of the upstairs lounge, as you saw in the film. But the stairway leading up into the second floor, he has intentionally kept it. Some of the charred wood, some of the soot on the walls, kept it that way. Some of the soot around the window, kept it that way as just remembrance and honor of the fire.
In order to, and looking at some of the footage that you have in there, you definitely had to go through old police records and stuff like that. How cooperative was the city with you in accessing those records, or was it like, we don't want to talk about this black spot on our history?
Tell you what, research is what took up most of this time, because for me as a storyteller, I want to start from scratch. I don't want to depend upon anybody else's telling of the story, because ultimately I'm responsible for what's in the film, and I didn't want to perpetuate any mistruths that there had been. So I started from scratch, reading through the police reports and reading through witness statements, and all that's public information. And so I was able to read through some of that. The problem that I did encounter is there were police recordings and other evidence that got destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. So much of what once existed was now gone, and that's heartbreaking, because like Michael Scarborough, the only person to hear, Roger Nunez allegedly say, "I'm going to burn this bar out," his interview was on tape. And so it would have been, I really wanted to have that part of the film, but the police department did respond to me. The fire department, they were very cooperative. That's where I found that swatch of wallpaper. So for the most part, everything was pretty cooperative, but it was a treasure hunt. Because sometimes I didn't know what I didn't know. I knew there were certain visuals that I wanted to include in the film, but didn't know if they existed. And if they did exist, where do I find them? So a lot of times it was just going to the library and searching through photographs that hadn't been cataloged. Interesting story, I was looking for just some photographs of the police department from that time period, just to put on the screen. And I was at the library looking through their files of police pictures, and I'm going picture after picture, and all of a sudden I come across this photograph of a staircase, charred, with a can of Roncinol lighter fluid at the base of it. I'm sitting in this library and I'm like looking down at the picture, looking around to see if anybody else sees me. I'm like, oh my, I just couldn't believe what I had just found. And I flipped it over, and it was dated June 24th, 1973, but it had been categorized as a Black Panther attack, because it was rumored at one point that it was related to the Black Panthers. So this photograph had been misfiled and lost for decades. So I was like, I've got to get this picture. So I got the library to license it to me. But it was a treasure hunt, and so the research process was probably the most tedious part, because I knew that I wanted this film to be a comprehensive film, comprehensive telling of the story, because we had such great interviews. I wanted to complement those. So it's a long-winded answer, but they weren't too, they were pretty cooperative.
Cool. Yes.
I'm just curious to see how you came about this Inferno. How were you introduced to it, and how did you get intrigued and compelling to do the storytelling of it?
The question is, how did I get involved with Upstairs Inferno? It all goes back to my documentary, Rated the Rainbow Lounge. Postcards are in the back, and I do have them for sale. I do have Square with me. But Rated the Rainbow Lounge is a documentary about a controversial gay bar raid that happened on the 40th anniversary of Stonewall in Fort Worth, Texas. Multiple people were arrested, some were seriously injured. And I'm from Dallas, and I had friends that were at the bar in Fort Worth, which is about 45 minutes away. We didn't know what was happening, but I felt like I needed to get my camera and start filming this, because I thought it would make a great short film. Well, the story became very sordid, and the film becoming a full-length film as we watched the investigation progress and see the police department evolve, because there were some very sordid allegations from the police department. Like, they were claiming that they were there for a bar check, and then once they were there for a bar check, patrons were grabbing their groins, and it just got really ridiculous. And so it became salacious, and there was a lot of activism. So I told them the film, the power of activism, the power of building coalitions with your law enforcement and city officials. Because ultimately, Fort Worth became a leader in LGBT equality, even being one of the first cities in Texas to include transgender protection in their anti-discrimination ordinance. So we used that film to help educate and enlighten people across the country, communities across the country, Mexico and Canada, in a respectful way. And one of the producers of Upstairs Inferno had seen the film and seen how we had told the story from history in a respectful, constructive way that we were using to educate people. And he told me the story of the Upstairs Lounge fire. Had you ever heard of this? And I hadn't. And I was shocked because it was the largest gay mass murder in U.S. history. And I thought to myself, why isn't this part of our common LGBT history narrative? And it needed to be. So I decided that I was going to take this on. And that was Genesis, I think it was 2012, 2013. And started doing my research and started getting in touch with people. Yes.
Have you shared the film with, because there's the LGBT museum in Fort Lauderdale, and then there's one in San Francisco as well. Have you been in touch with them to share that, to get some more exposure?
San Francisco, we screened in San Francisco at the Frameline Film Festival, which is the oldest LGBT film festival in the country. On the eve of the fire in 2016, which happened to be 11 days after Pulse. I mean, Frameline is huge for a filmmaker, and here, I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I mean, we as a community, as a country, we're reeling from this tragedy, and I didn't know how people were going to accept this film because it's so hauntingly similar. But thankfully, a lot of people did come, and the LGBT History Museum, they did an introduction and were part of the Q&A, so I'd worked with them. They actually provided some of the footage, black and white footage of MCC you saw in the film. There's a question over here. Yes.
The business owner who was interviewed saying that they really didn't care that it happened, was that the sort of mentality that a lot of people had at that time? In the community itself, in the gay community? So,
would you like to answer that?
Yes. It was, again, the movie portrayed a group of us that came in as carpetbaggers. We were there for our own purposes. And I think that was somewhat of a cover for them that they weren't more involved in trying to do something. I told Robert last night, one memory I have was that when we were there, we would go to the bars at night and we would talk with people, and we would see them in clusters that were crying or holding one another, and we'd go and talk with them. And we also wanted to let them know that life goes on, you just can't stop. And we went into one bar one night, and we noticed at the far end of the bar there were 2 fire doors with panic bars, and the panic bars had heavy chain around it with a padlock. I said to Robert last night in our time of sharing, I have never seen, if any of you know Reverend Elder Troy Perry, I've never seen him so ballistic in my life. And let me tell you, when what you are saying can stop the disco music and stop the dancing and stop the drinking, you're doing something. Finally, the manager, the owner came out, and Reverend Perry said to him, "We're not leaving till you remove that chain." Those weren't his exact words. And Troy is a very intelligent person, and knowing some of the response we had gotten from the other owners, he said, while we are here, we'll be back to check that door is not chained again. And he said, we have friends in New Orleans, you don't know who they are. They'll be here every month. And they'll report back to me. And he said, you don't want me to fly back from LA sometime. And Troy did know people. And there were people that checked it, would call him. But there was not only an antagonism towards the group that was working there, but also a total disregard after this horrendous event. a chained fire door, as if lessons weren't being learned by people in our own community.
Yeah.
I think we probably have time for one more question.
For the Reverend, who's familiar with Metropolitan Church, and I was surprised in the film, we had a symposium last night on the history of the LGBT movement and our obstacles that are overcoming, and the church was brought up, along with the fact that we were curious as to, I am curious as to how it became an issue with the fire at multiple churches during that period, or metropolitan churches.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
The metropolitan churches that were being burned in periods that were mentioned?
Yes.
Okay, which you mentioned. No, that was in the film.
Right.
I'm getting my symposium at the issue of tonight, I'm confused here, but it's all one.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that. Did that happen more after that? Or is that, as a social acceptance, finally kind of cut that down?
But again, yes, it did happen, not only the burning, but other situations. I pastored our congregation in Houston for a while, and the pastor before me, Reverend Jerry Ann Harvey, they had been, I'm not sure exactly what time of the day it happened or anything. Anyways, the Ku Klux Klan came and burned a cross on the doorstep of the MCC in Houston. And again, that happened more than the press ever reported it. So it was not only the community that didn't learn about it, it was society in general that didn't learn about it. It was just dismissed as, another incident in the life of another MCC. But there was a lot more that went on than people realized when it was occurring.
And just to tag onto your question, we did mention in the film the fire at the Mother Church, the Nashville fire, then the upstairs lounge, which had an MCC connection. But a month after the fire in New Orleans, the MCC church in San Francisco was torched. So 4 fires in 1 year, 1973. So very, they weren't related as far as like a single person being responsible for them, but going to John was saying, there's this mentality, and over the years I've gotten close to Reverend Perry and many of the other MCC clergy, and I've heard stories that would make your skin crawl of what they've had to endure. So it's the MCC Church is a leader in our LGBT equality movement. So thank you.
I think I speak for everyone here too in thanking Robert.
Yes.
For the time and the effort and the love that he's put into this film, and it shows, Robert, it shows. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your week to honor the victims and their families in this story of the upstairs lounge fire. Please tell your friends, just help, because we're living in really uncertain political times right now, and I think that's and we just need to educate and enlighten, and if we aren't visible, we become invisible, and so please keep this story visible and just share the story online, Upstairs Inferno, the documentary, Upstairs Inferno on Twitter, and just, even if not to promote the film, just to raise awareness of this incident, because we cannot ever let our community or anyone else forget about this incident again. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you.